Have you ever been deeply hurt by someone, only to watch them act like it never happened? No apology, no remorse, just silence, small talk and fake smiles, and somehow you end up feeling crazy for even bringing it up. You start questioning your memory, your emotions, your worth. But here's the truth. They didn't forget what they did. They remember everything. Their silence isn't confusion, it's control. And the most disturbing part, they need you to doubt yourself so they don't have to face themselves. In this video, we'll break down exactly why people who hurt you pretend nothing happened. Through Carl Jung's shadow psychology and Stoic wisdom, we'll expose the hidden reasons behind their denial, gaslighting, and emotional silence. You'll understand why they protect their fragile ego at your expense, and how to stop letting their avoidance become your burden. If you've ever been made to feel like your pain was an overreaction, this video is your clarity. Like and subscribe, because your peace starts with the truth. Let's begin. Number 1, the shadow self. They remember, they project. They remember what they did. Every word, every silence, every boundary they crossed. The person who hurt you hasn't forgotten. They've just buried the truth deep enough to pretend it never happened. But what's buried is not erased. Carl Jung called this the shadow self, the repressed, unconscious part of our psyche that contains everything we deny in ourselves. The guilt, the shame, the cruelty, the envy. And when a person is emotionally immature, they don't face the shadow. They project it. They assign it to someone else. And more often than not, that someone is you. This isn't forgetfulness. It's psychological defense. It's not that they don't remember. It's that they can't afford to remember. Their entire sense of identity would collapse if they truly admitted what they did and what it meant. So instead of accountability, they rewrite the story. They recast the roles. You become the sensitive one, the overthinker, the one who won't let go. Meanwhile, they walk away as the rational, reasonable, calm one. But that calmness is not peace, it's repression, and repression has a cost. According to Jung, whatever we disown within ourselves doesn't just disappear, it festers and controls us from the dark. That's what happens with people who hurt you and then pretend nothing happened. They're not making peace with their actions. They're burying the truth and hoping it never surfaces. But the shadow doesn't stay quiet forever, and when it leaks out, it shows up as blame, deflection, minimization, or silence. You see it when they say things like, "You're remembering it wrong," or "That's not what I meant." In those moments, they're not engaging with truth. They're avoiding it. And that avoidance makes you the one left holding the emotional debris. You carry the pain, the questions, the confusion. You begin to second-guess your reality, wondering if maybe you did exaggerate, or if maybe you are just too sensitive. But here's the truth. The moment you start defending your right to be hurt, you're already being manipulated by their projection. This is where Stoic philosophy offers sharp clarity. Epictetus said, "It's not events themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Meaning, when someone pretends nothing happened after hurting you, your suffering compounds only if you judge their behavior as mysterious or meaningful. But if you recognize it for what it is, avoidance, projection, fear, you stop personalizing it. You stop carrying their shadow. Now consider the real-life example of Howard Hughes. Brilliant, visionary, and also emotionally elusive. He hurt people, abandoned relationships, lived in detachment and control, but he didn't forget what he did. He buried it. He hid from the consequences of his behavior behind layers of control and denial. Jung would say that Hughes lived entirely in his persona, the polished mask he wore to the world, while his shadow rotted underneath. Eventually, it caught up with him. Not because he suddenly became evil, but because he refused to become whole. And this is what happens to anyone who refuses to integrate their shadow. They begin to see others as mirrors, and every flaw they refuse to admit in themselves, they start attacking in others. That's why your clarity feels threatening to them. When you see clearly what happened and name it without shame, it forces them to confront what they worked so hard to deny. And that confrontation is what they fear most. Marcus Aurelius said, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. When someone pretends your pain doesn't exist, you don't need to scream louder. You don't need to beg to be understood. Your strength is in your stillness, your clarity, your refusal to be recast in their story." But let's go deeper, Jung said. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That includes pretending they did nothing wrong. It includes acting like you're crazy for remembering what they're desperate to forget. And often, the more emotionally aware you are, the more you become the target of their projections. You feel too much. You notice inconsistencies. You remember details. And that awareness makes you dangerous to their ego. Seneca offers a grounding reminder. A good character, when established, becomes a shield. When you know who you are, when you're rooted in truth, you don't need others to confirm your experience. You don't need an apology to validate your memory. You carry your own clarity like armor. You don't fight for justice through confrontation. You embody it through self-possession. So what do you do when someone hurts you and acts like nothing happened? You stop expecting growth from someone who refuses reflection. You stop explaining your pain to someone committed to misunderstanding it. And most of all, you stop waiting for a moment of honesty from someone who is still acting out a lie. They remember what they did, but remembering is not the same as reckoning. And that's why they project. Because ownership would require a level of self-awareness they haven't reached yet. Let them carry their shadow. Let them live in the story where they're always the hero. But don't step into it. Don't play the role they've assigned you. You know what happened, you felt it, and that truth is enough. Number 2, the psychology of denial and gaslighting. Denial isn't forgetfulness. It's protection, not of you, but of them. When someone hurts you and acts like nothing happened, they're not confused. They're trying to protect the most fragile thing they own, their self-image. Carl Jung called this kind of behavior part of the provisional life, a life lived not in authenticity, but behind a mask. The mask says, "I'm a good person." The mask says, "I couldn't have done that." But behind the mask is the shadow, unacknowledged guilt, repressed truth, and emotional immaturity. This is why their silence cuts so deep. It's not just the absence of words, it's the refusal to recognize what they did. And that refusal is not passive, it's calculated. Because if they acknowledge the damage they cause, they must also face the question, what kind of person does that make me? And many simply cannot bear the answer. So when you confront someone living in denial, you're not just threatening their comfort, you're threatening their entire identity. That's why they don't just disagree with you. They destabilize you. They twist your words. They question your memory. You're remembering it wrong. You're too sensitive. You always take things the wrong way. That is not confusion. That is gaslighting, a slow erosion of your clarity so they never have to face themselves. Gaslighting doesn't always look like chaos. It often looks like composure. They'll say it calmly, gently, even with a smile. And that's what makes it so disorienting, because part of you starts to wonder, if they seem this reasonable, maybe I'm the one who's off. But you're not. You're waking up to a manipulation that was designed to make you question your sanity. Jung explained that when people can't hold both their light and their darkness, they begin projecting their shadow onto others. What they cannot accept in themselves, they assign to you. The moment you reflect their behavior back to them, they react defensively. But what they're really defending isn't truth. It's the persona, the illusion, their self-made image that they worship more than the relationship they harmed. This is where Stoic philosophy becomes your shield. Marcus Aurelius once said, If someone can show me I am wrong, I will gladly change, for I seek the truth, which has never harmed anyone. That's what real strength sounds like. But gaslighters are not grounded. They are floating in a fragile identity, and your clarity threatens that illusion. Let's look at Lance Armstrong. For years, he was a global icon, a cancer survivor, a champion, a symbol of hope. But behind the scenes, there was systematic deception. When accusations surfaced, he didn't admit. He attacked, he denied, he destroyed reputations. Because the truth would have destroyed the persona. Jung would say Armstrong wasn't just hiding what he did. He was hiding from what he feared he really was. Gaslighting on that scale looks obvious, but in everyday life, it's subtle. A dismissive glance, a carefully timed silence, a shift in tone. Suddenly, you're the one overreacting. You're the problem, not their betrayal, not their silence, not their dishonesty, just you and your response. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters. You may not be able to change their behavior, but you can stop letting it rewrite your truth. You don't have to argue. You don't have to win. You just have to stay anchored in what you know. Sometimes they do understand what they did. That's why they're working so hard to deny it. If you believe their story, they get to stay comfortable. But if you stay clear, they have to face what they've spent their entire life avoiding. Responsibility. And for them, responsibility feels like death. Jung wrote, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. That includes making you feel like the villain. That includes pretending history didn't happen. That includes accusing you of overreacting, just to avoid looking in the mirror. Seneca said, to be everywhere is to be nowhere. And when your emotional energy is scattered trying to get someone to acknowledge your pain, you vanish from your own life. The longer you chase their validation, the more distant your own peace becomes. So what do you do when someone gaslights you? You stop explaining your pain to people who are committed to misunderstanding it. You stop begging for closure from those who fear honesty. You stop carrying the emotional debt of someone else's avoidance, and you return to what is clear. You remember what happened. You remember what it meant. You remember how it felt. You do not need their permission to know your truth, and you do not need their acknowledgement to begin your healing. You were not too much. You were not broken. You were not wrong for asking for clarity, for truth, for integrity. You were right to notice. You were right to speak, and you are right to walk away when truth is treated like a threat. Let them live behind the mask, but don't let them make you question what you saw with open eyes. Number 3, the weaponization of silence. Not all silence is peace. Sometimes silence is a weapon. It's not a pause. It's a tactic. When someone hurts you and then refuses to talk about it, they aren't being calm or composed. They're controlling the narrative by starving it. And that's silence. It isn't empty, it's loud. It echoes through your thoughts, forces you to fill in the gaps, and makes you question what's real. Carl Jung understood this dynamic well. He believed silence can be used to suppress truth, to create psychological dependency, and to avoid the painful work of self-examination. What makes it powerful is its ambiguity. You don't know what they're thinking, you don't know what they'll do next, and so you wait, you ruminate, you wonder if you should reach out. You replay every word, every gesture. Their silence becomes a mirror you stare into, but all you see is yourself growing smaller. And that shrinking, that's what they count on. Because in the hands of someone emotionally evasive, silence isn't about resolution. It's about power. It shifts the burden of emotional labor entirely onto you. You're the one left holding the tension. Eventually, you start to believe that any response, even a cold one, is better than none. That belief makes you vulnerable. This is what Jung referred to as psychic possession. When another person's emotional state dominates your internal world, you stop living your life. You start orbiting theirs. Their absence becomes your obsession. That silence feeds the dynamic, not breaks it. The Stoics saw this clearly, Epictetus taught. Freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. When someone withholds their voice, their presence, or their truth, you must remind yourself, that is their choice, not your failure. Their silence is not your problem to solve. It is their discomfort to carry. But let's be honest, when you care about someone, when you've trusted them, the silence doesn't feel philosophical. It feels personal. It feels like punishment. And that's where many people collapse. They send the text. They reach out again. They break their own dignity just to feel seen. They trade clarity for proximity. They sacrifice self-respect just to escape the discomfort of uncertainty. Take Steve Jobs, brilliant, visionary, but also known for his ability to freeze people out emotionally. He could ignore, isolate, and detach from those closest to him when disappointed or challenged. His silence wasn't just absence. It was a form of control. People around him often adjusted their behavior, their tone, even their truth, just to avoid that icy distance. Jung would say Jobs used silence to protect his persona of intensity and perfection. But in doing so, he created emotional dependency in the people around him. Dependency masked as loyalty. Now, your life may not involve billion-dollar decisions, but the emotional mechanism is the same. When someone close to you uses silence as a weapon, it creates an invisible leash. You move closer. They pull away. You try. They say nothing. And without realizing it, your self-worth becomes tied to their next move. This is where Stoic strength is essential, Marcus Aurelius wrote. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Their silence is an outside event. Your panic, your self-doubt, your need for closure, those are within. That's where the work is. The antidote to manipulative silence is not louder noise. It's presence, stillness, returning to your center. Ask yourself, what am I making their silence mean? What am I trying to fix in myself through their attention? Often, the wound is older than the person withholding from you. It taps into abandonment, shame, fear. But silence cannot heal those things. Only self-awareness can. Seneca said, "No man was ever wise by chance. Wisdom comes from choice. It comes from choosing not to chase someone into emotional fog. It comes from choosing dignity over desperation. It comes from realizing that silence is not always an invitation. It's sometimes a boundary. And if it is meant to disconnect you, your job is not to resist, it's to release. And maybe that's the point of silence. When it's used to control, it reveals the truth they couldn't say out loud. It tells you, without speaking, what they value, how they handle discomfort, what they believe they're entitled to. And as painful as it is, that silence is an answer. Not the one you wanted, but the one you needed. You are allowed to walk away from confusion, even if it never resolves. You are allowed to protect your clarity, even if it costs connection, and you can speak your truth, even when they don't. So what do you do when someone uses silence to control you? You stop filling the space they created. You let it echo. You let it show you who they are. Because anyone who truly values connection doesn't disappear to prove a point. They speak to repair, to clarify, to build. Silence can be needed, but when it's weaponized, it becomes strategic. You don't have to beg for closure that was never theirs to give. Your healing doesn't begin when they return. It begins when you stop waiting. When you stop making their silence more powerful than your presence. Let them go quiet, but don't let their silence become your story. Let your story be this: I chose peace over confusion. I chose clarity over craving. I chose to hear my own voice again. Number 4, the inability to apologize, an emotional ceiling. There's a unique kind of pain that comes from waiting for an apology that will never come, not because they forgot, but because they simply can't. Emotionally, psychologically, developmentally, you're not waiting on words, you're waiting on growth that hasn't happened yet. Carl Jung called this limitation a failure of psychological integration. It means someone cannot hold both their light and their shadow, the parts they show to the world and the parts they've buried deep. To apologize sincerely, a person has to confront the part of themselves that did harm. They must step outside their ego and look honestly at who they were in that moment. That takes strength, that takes self-awareness. Above all, it takes emotional maturity, and many people haven't developed that far. To them, guilt doesn't feel like a signal for moral growth. It feels like annihilation, because they have fused their identity with their actions. If they did something wrong, it means they are wrong, and that belief is intolerable. So instead of confronting the pain they caused, they retreat into avoidance, into justification, into blame. Seneca once wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." This applies not only to material wealth, but to emotional wealth too. The emotionally poor person is the one who craves to be seen as right more than they desire to actually do right. They crave the illusion of being good, even if it costs real goodness. So they trade accountability for ego preservation. This is why their apology never comes, because their entire self-worth is propped up by a fragile image of themselves as kind, loving, or moral. To apologize would unravel that illusion, and they'd rather let a relationship die than face their own reflection without that mask. Take the case of Elizabeth Holmes, once hailed as a tech visionary. She built her persona around being a world-changing genius. But when the lies of Theranos were exposed, instead of offering true accountability, she doubled down, blamed others, dodged truth. Why? Because the persona was too intertwined with her sense of self. Jung would say she could not integrate the shadow of deceit without shattering the illusion she depended on. The apology wasn't withheld out of malice, but out of incapacity. Now think about how that mirrors everyday life. You confront someone, you speak your truth, and they deflect or minimize or go silent, and the ache you feel isn't just from the pain they cause, it's from the dissonance, the injustice of being made to carry the emotional weight they refuse to lift. The moment you ask for accountability, you're asking them to rise beyond their current ceiling, and when they don't, you're left questioning your worth. But this is where Stoicism becomes your ally. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Their inability to apologize is an outside event. You cannot force someone to grow. You cannot speed up their emotional timeline. What you can do is stop tying your healing to their maturity. You can stop waiting at a door they've locked from the inside. Stoicism teaches that our peace depends not on the behavior of others, but on the clarity of our own boundaries. If someone cannot apologize, they are telling you, not with words but with absence, where they are in their development. That is not cruelty, it's information, and information gives you power. This is how healing begins, not with closure, but with clarity, not with their remorse, but with your understanding. You stop needing the apology because you understand the architecture of their silence. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's limitation. Sometimes it's fear. And sometimes it's both. You start to see the truth behind their behavior, not to excuse it, but to stop internalizing it. You stop thinking, if they really cared, they would apologize. And you start realizing, maybe they do care, but not enough to face themselves. Not yet. The Stoics never waited for others to act right before they chose to live rightly. Epictetus taught, Don't demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do, and you will go on well. Accepting that someone cannot meet you where you are doesn't mean you lower your standards. It means you honor your own growth enough not to make it dependent on theirs. If the apology comes, let it be a gift, not a requirement. If it doesn't, let it be a lesson, not a wound. Because ultimately, the apology you want is not "I'm sorry," it's "I understand what I did, I take responsibility, and I won't do it again." But that kind of apology comes from reflection, from remorse, from growth, and if someone hasn't done the inner work, they won't have the inner language to give it. That's the emotional ceiling. That's where you find yourself waiting, hoping, hurting. But here's the truth. You can stop waiting now, because your worth was never tied to their awareness. Your peace was never theirs to give. And your healing doesn't require their permission. It only requires one thing: your decision to rise above the silence, above the denial, above the ceiling that kept them stuck. You are not stuck, you are awake, and that's enough to begin. Number 5, the liberating truth: your healing is your own. There comes a point in every journey of emotional recovery when the hardest truth becomes the most freeing. They are not coming back with the apology, the explanation, or the closure you thought you needed. And here's what's even harder to swallow, but absolutely essential to understand. You don't need it anymore. The people who hurt you and acted like nothing happened, they made a choice. Whether consciously or unconsciously, they opted for comfort over conscience. And as much as that reveals their character, it also hands you something far more powerful than their regret ever could. Clarity, Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." This truth, once digested, changes everything because it shifts the focus from them to you. You can no longer depend on their awareness to validate your pain. You must validate it yourself. You can no longer wait for their remorse to begin healing. You must begin anyway, and you must stop asking unconscious people to be the architects of your awakening. It doesn't work that way. Think about it this way. If someone is emotionally asleep, their behavior, no matter how destructive, is consistent with their level of awareness. To expect otherwise is to hand your peace to a fantasy. You're trying to draw water from an empty well. No matter how long you wait, no matter how many times you explain your pain, the well stays dry. And worse, you begin to feel like you're the problem for being thirsty. That's where many people stay stuck, looping in confusion, trying to decode why someone could hurt them and feel nothing. But they do feel something. They just won't show it, or can't, or they repress it so deeply they convince even themselves it's not there. Jung would call this disintegration. The person splits their identity, creating a false self to mask the pain they refuse to face. So yes, they hurt you, and no, they won't admit it. Not because it didn't happen, but because their survival depends on not admitting it. So where does that leave you? It leaves you with the only thing that's ever been truly yours. Your response, your decision, your path forward. The Stoics remind us over and over, we don't control other people, only our interpretation of events, Marcus Aurelius wrote. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Their inability to face themselves is the obstacle. But your response to that reality, that becomes the way. Healing, then, is not about getting them to see what they did. It's about seeing what it did to you and deciding that you will not let it define you. It's about reclaiming authorship over your own story, not erasing what happened, but integrating it so fully that it no longer owns you. This doesn't mean you suppress your pain. It means you stop outsourcing your healing to someone else's readiness. You hold space for grief without building your home in it. You acknowledge the wound without waiting for the person who inflicted it to return and fix it. Consider the story of Oprah Winfrey. Abused as a child, abandoned by people who were supposed to protect her, she could have easily grown bitter, could have spent her life waiting for apologies and accountability, but instead she chose a different path, a path of meaning, contribution, and emotional sovereignty. Her healing didn't begin when others acknowledged their wrongdoing. It began when she stopped needing them to. This is the essence of Stoic healing. It's not a suppression of pain, but a transformation of it, Seneca wrote. Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Your emotional pain, if faced honestly, can become your greatest source of power. Not because it was fair, not because it was deserved, but because you chose to rise rather than collapse. And here's something even more liberating. You don't have to make sense of their silence, their absence, or their lack of remorse. You don't have to win the moral argument in your head. You don't have to keep replaying the betrayal to prove you were right. You were, and that's enough. Your healing doesn't require them to agree. It requires you to accept, not accept what they did, but accept that it happened and that they may never give you what you hope for. And in that space, where the expectation dies, peace is born. It doesn't happen all at once. It happens in quiet decisions, choosing to stop the mental arguments, choosing not to check if they finally understood, choosing to live your truth even if they never admit theirs. That's when you realize the closure you seek isn't a moment, it's a practice, a boundary, a return to self-respect. It's what you do every day when you stop bleeding for someone who won't even admit they cut you. Your peace begins the moment you stop needing permission to claim it. And from that place of clarity, something shifts. You stop chasing what cannot be given. You stop shrinking to win someone's false forgiveness. And you start walking forward, not because they changed, but because you did. You are not the wound, you are the healing. And you don't need their apology to become whole again. You only need the courage to stop waiting. You were never meant to carry the silence they left behind. You were meant to carry the lesson, and if that lesson burned, good. That means it etched itself deep enough to teach you what words never could. Your healing is not a transaction. It's a decision, a return to self-respect, and a quiet refusal to be defined by someone else's emotional ceiling. If you've made it this far, you already know. Your peace doesn't begin with their apology. It begins with your clarity. So don't wait. Don't beg. Don't explain your pain to those committed to misunderstanding it. Walk forward with dignity, not because you were never hurt, but because you chose not to stay broken. If this resonated with you, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe. Because this is more than philosophy. It's a way back to yourself, and you deserve to walk that path in full power.